Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Diaries Voice, we retell those moments honest. Every day, sometimes controversial, every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. A single tear hit the lock screen and smeared the blue light, turning the words beneath her thumb into a small, glowing tide pool. Nora Bennett blinked, then blinked again, but the messages didn't dissolve. The name at the top of the thread, Kara P., sat beside two pink hearts, and the latest bubble read, "Tomorrow can't come fast enough." Last time was unreal. Daniel's reply just above it was not the sort of thing a husband of 23 years sent to anyone, least of all a coworker. He'd sprinted out to grab Vietnamese takeout after realizing they were out of eggs. He'd left his phone face down on the kitchen island, buzzing once, then twice, then vibrating steadily until it felt like the room had its own pulse. Nora wasn't a snoop. She knew the shape and weight of that line about herself. But marriage teaches you a person's rhythms, and something in the rhythm had gone wrong. Her hand hovered, then turned the phone over. The screen woke with a chime. "Can't wait to feel your hands again. We'll say it's a client lunch." "Your hotel, not mine." The thread scrolled backward into other days, some messages coy, some anatomical, all threaded with winking emojis that made her skin go cold. She found a photo, nothing explicit, but suggestive enough. A wine glass on a hotel table, a slice of late sunlight over unmade sheets. Daniel had written, "Next time, no stopping." Nora steadied herself against the edge of the island. The soapstone counter they had chosen during the big renovation 5 years earlier after the roof leak, after the new cabinets, had always felt like a triumph, proof they could build something orderly out of chaos. Tonight, it felt like a beautiful prop. The whole house did. The pendant lights hummed softly above the island. The old brass clock Nora had inherited from her Aunt Jo clicked its even in different seconds. Behind the closed patio door, the lake made its delicate noises, small waves, tapping at the dock like a timid guest. She clicked Kara's profile photo out of an instinct that surprised and embarrassed her. The picture opened to a smiling woman in her late 20s with beach blonde hair and a tiny gold lightning bolt at her throat. Purchasing coordinator Easton in Vale, the bio, said the same premium appliance company where Daniel was a regional sales director. Of course, tires crunched on gravel outside. Headlights swept the living room wall and passed on. Nora wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, closed the message app, and placed the phone exactly where he had left it. She stood until the front door opened, and Daniel's voice, annoyingly cheerful, bounced into the hall. "Hey, they were out of spring rolls, but I got extra goiquan and the peanut sauce you love." He stepped into the kitchen, handsome, in the way that had gotten him paid gray at the temples, the posture of a man who took up just enough space. The smile slid off his face as he registered hers. "What happened?" he asked, setting down the paper bags. "You look like Nora. What is it?" She kept her voice even. "I read your messages with Kara." It was subtle, the way a shock traveled through him, the micro flinch in the jaw, the slow blink, then the quick darting inventory of the room like he'd misplaced a confession and needed to find it before she did. He moved a chair as if to sit, then changed his mind and gripped the chair back instead. The silence between them had shape and weight. "I was going to talk to you," he said finally. His voice was oddly careful, as if he were testing floorboards after a flood. "Actually, this might be good timing." "Good timing," Nora repeated. The two words felt like splinters. "I haven't done anything," Daniel said, lifting both hands for peace. "We talked, a lot, and we made plans to meet, yes, but before anything happened, I wanted to talk to you about rethinking what marriage looks like for us." She stared. "Say it plain." "About opening things up," he said. When the words were out, something in him relaxed, and that relaxation, more than the words, sent heat rushing to her face. He moved around the island and pulled out a stool, the same easy motion he used when he'd close a deal. "Sit level the tone, control the terms." "Nora, we've built an incredible life together. I love you. That hasn't changed, but we've been us since college. People our age, our stage, sometimes need room to explore without blowing up the foundation. It's more common than you think." "That's your case," she said flatly. "You're pitching me like I'm a showroom floor." "It's not a pitch," he said, and of course it was. "It's an option." Not just for me, for both of us. Reciprocity, boundaries, agreements. I've been reading. She looked past him as if the lake might have an answer floating on it. The pendant lights turned the countertop into a stage, and here they were standing on their marks with the wrong lines in their mouths. You text a woman from work that last time was unreal. You make a reservation for an affair at a hotel, and your solution is to ask me to bless it. It sounds bad when you— It is bad, she said. He pressed fingers to his brow, then let his hand fall and met her eyes. I'm being honest with you before anything physical happens. That has to count for something. What exactly does it count for? The clock ticked as if they'd hired it to keep time on an experiment. 23 years, the ticks said indifferent. 23 years. Variety, he said, and flinched when he heard himself. I mean change. Space to feel. Alive. And you could have that too. Nora's laugh came out wrong too bright. So magnanimous. He exhaled, then softened his tone, lowering it to the register that made people sign contracts. I don't want to lose what we have. I just don't want to pretend we're the same people we were. Her body moved before her mind finished the thought. She pushed the takeout aside and stepped back. Get out of this kitchen. Nora, out, she said, and to her own surprise, the word didn't crack. I can't look at you right now. He held her gaze a beat longer than he should have, like he was deciding whether to escalate or retreat. Then he shifted edges, hardening. You're overreacting. This is a conversation grown adults can have. Then have it in another room, she said. I need air. He took the hint in the hallway. At the threshold, he turned, and his voice dropped into that faux gentle certainty that always made her bristle. You're angry now, but give it time. The idea won't feel so big. The door frame framed him like a portrait. And for a fleeting moment, Nora wondered when exactly the man she married had learned to speak to her like a client. When he was gone, the clock resumed its steady witnessing. The lake sent up a cool breath and fogged a corner of the glass. The next days fell into a strange choreography. At the community health center, where Nora managed operations, she performed the competence that had kept the place afloat through grant cycles and flu seasons, staffed the front desk. When Zoe called in sick, smoothed a double booking, filled a vending machine with tiny bottles of hand sanitizer. At home, she drifted past Daniel like a satellite, past a planet responding to meteorological questions about schedules and trash day, while leaving weather of the heart unreported. She slept in the small room that used to be Lila's when their daughter was in high school, and she slept hard only once, and even that felt like theft. On the 6th evening, Daniel stood in the living room with his jacket still on and said with the same careful cadence as before, Have you thought more about what I said? Nora set down the book she had been pretending to read. A single stupid tear betrayed her. She didn't bother to hide it. She walked past him without a word, climbed the stairs, and closed the door to the bedroom that used to be theirs. Her pulse beat hard in her ears. The old clock ticked deeper in the house, patient as bedrock. Sometime after midnight, on her back in the quiet of the guest room, a thought came clean and whole. I won't let him define the terms. The thought wasn't rage, it was geometry. Anger makes jagged shapes. Geometry makes lines. Morning brought coffee, and the workaday mercy of routine. Daniel was at the table nursing an espresso when she came in still, in her robe hair twisted into a knot she'd built in elevators and parking lots for 2 decades of professional mornings. I've thought about your proposal, she said, sitting across from him. His eyes flicked up, surprised, hopeful, a boy who'd heard a teacher say maybe, and translated it to yes, and we've been the same shape for a long time, Nora said, stirring cream into her mug. Maybe the shape needs to change. Relief washed visibly across his face. He reached for her hand, and then seeing she'd kept both of hers wrapped around the mug, redirected to a napkin instead, flattening it pointlessly. You have no idea how glad I am to hear that. This can be good for us, Nora. Thoughtful. Honest. Honest, she repeated. That would be new. I mean it, he said quickly. Rules. Agreements. We do this together. She nodded once, a small, contained movement. I suppose people do need variety sometimes. That word again. It flickered in his eyes, recognition, then gratitude, as if she'd cracked a hard door and he could see light through it. Exactly. Thank you for being open-minded. He checked his watch, reflexive. I've got the 9 o'clock budget call. We can talk more tonight. He stood, leaned to kiss her forehead, thought better of it, squeezed her shoulder instead, and gathered his laptop bag like a shield. "Tonight," she said. At the door, he glanced back with a relieved half-smile that made him look younger and in a way that surprised her smaller. "We'll figure it out." She held his gaze until the latch caught. The house exhaled. The clock resumed. The lake tapped. Nora lifted her phone, scrolled to a number she hadn't used in months, and pressed call. When the line picked up, she said only, "It's time," and then after a pause, "Tonight." She set the phone down and washed their 2 mugs. Steam rose around her wrists and vanished into the morning air. The kitchen looked exactly as it had the night before, pendant lights, soapstone, neat stacks of mail, and yet it felt rearranged, as if she'd shifted the furniture of the invisible. She dried her hands, straightened the flattened napkin he'd left on the table, and listened to the clock keep its unargumentative time. "Tonight," she said again softly to no one in particular, and the quiet took the word without comment. By dusk, the lake had gone slate-colored ripples scoring the surface like handwriting. Nora moved through the house without hurry, collecting small things with the practical attention she used at work, a stack of coasters, an extra throw on the sofa, the pan with the least temperamental handle. She set onions to sweat in butter and let their sweetness wander through the rooms. The act of cooking steadied her. Heat and knife work asked only for focus, not forgiveness. When the front door opened, Daniel's voice landed in the entryway with an old familiarity. "I'm home." The sound of keys, the rustle of a coat sleeve. He stepped into the kitchen, paused at the smell, and smiled cautiously. "That's unexpected." "In a good way." Nora did not turn from the stove. "You like it medium," she said. "The steak." "Medium," he echoed, relieved by the ordinary exchange and eager to keep it going. He set his briefcase by the island, scanned her face for clues, and found none he could read. "Should I open a bottle?" "In the living room," she said. "Use the blue opener. It doesn't shred the cork." He kissed the air near her temple, close enough to be noted, not close enough to land, and went to the bar cart. When the cork came free with a tidy pop, the doorbell rang. They both looked toward the hallway. Daniel's brows dipped. Expecting someone, Nora wiped her hands and untied her apron. "Yes," she said, and her voice carried no temperature at all. "I am." The man at the door was in his early 30s, dark-haired, tall, without seeming to loom, white button-down open at the throat. He lifted a hand in a friendly half-wave. "Hey," he said to Daniel, as if arriving at a house party. "Number 4, right?" Daniel blinked. "I'm sorry." "Number 4. The man repeated and peered past him toward the kitchen. "Where's Nora?" "I brought the Cabernet she likes." Nora appeared at Daniel's shoulder. "Hi, Eli," she said. "Come in. We're in the living room." Daniel pivoted toward her. "Eli." She walked past him, as if he were another piece of furniture to be navigated. Eli set the bottle next to the one already breathing and dropped easily onto the end of the sofa, looking around the room with appreciative, unhurried eyes, the way people do when they're not worried about being asked to leave. "You changed the rug," he said. "I like it." "Thicker pile," Nora said. "It muffles the clock." She glanced toward the hall where that patient brass face kept its measured count. The sound seemed louder than usual, or perhaps Daniel was listening harder. The doorbell rang again. Daniel moved faster this time, as if speed might wrest control back into his hands. At the step stood a compact man with a chef's roll under one arm and a grin that flashed and vanished. "Sorry I'm late," he said, squeezing past. "Traffic on the causeway." He moved straight to the kitchen, shrugged off his jacket, and unrolled his knives with the reverence of a musician preparing a beloved instrument. "Nora, do you want the steak seared in the cast iron or the stainless? I'll baste with time either way." "Cast iron," she said. "It holds." Daniel planted himself between the kitchen and the living room like a human doorstop. "What is this?" "Dinner," the man called over the rattle of a pan. "And an evening. I'm Marco, by the way." Marco, Daniel repeated flatly. He looked at Nora, then at Eli, who was idly flipping through the book on the coffee table as if he lived there, and back toward the kitchen where Marco was heating oil until it whispered. The doorbell rang a third time. This guest was younger Jim, fit a gray t-shirt beneath a leather jacket, the whole look curated to seem uncurated. He walked in with the loose steadiness of a person accustomed to being welcomed. "Hey, team," he said, giving Daniel a chin-up nod. "Jasper." "Team Daniel," said, voice slipping up half a step. Is the wine open? Jasper asked, already reaching for a glass. Nora, you look stunning. Nora stood by the mantel, one hand lightly resting on it, as if steadying a painting. Thank you, she said. The fourth knock came softer than the bell. The last arrival took the stairs two at a time, without waiting for an invitation like someone late for a meeting he'd been told not to miss. Daniel lunged after him. Hey, you can't just... It's Wednesday, the man called down cheerful. Upstairs is mine. Daniel reached the landing just as the stranger blonde barefoot turned into the master bedroom. The sight of a new body moving through that doorway unlatched something in Daniel's chest he hadn't known could open. He felt heat rise in his neck and something disturbingly like nausea roll through his stomach. He grabbed the doorframe, voice frayed. Out of my room. The man stretched on the bed as if testing a hotel mattress, laced his fingers behind his head and smiled mildly. Our room, he said not unkindly. Nora said tonight was my night. My Daniel's mouth went dry. The framed photos on the dresser, Lila at 16 in her debate blazer. Nora in a wool hat, hair full of lake wind, looked like props in a cruel set. He took a step toward the bed he'd slept in for years and found his legs unreliable. Ask nicely, the man said, and the smile slipped into something like pity. I'm happy to share. Daniel turned and ran back downstairs, taking the steps too fast, catching the heel of his shoe on the bottom riser, stumbling, righting himself with a hand on the banister. In the living room, Eli and Jasper were talking about a documentary, as if the house were not currently on fire. Marco flicked fat over the steak with a spoon, the blossom of butter and brown in the air, almost obscene. Nora, Daniel, said the word ragged. What is this? Who are these men? She looked at him evenly. You asked for a different shape. I'm trying one. I meant, his voice cracked and scraped. He coughed to clear it and tried again. I meant something considered, not this. Marco, Nora called, still not removing her eyes from Daniel. Medium for him. Got it, Marco said, tipping the pan. Eli raised his glass. To Nora he said. Daniel slapped the rim of the glass down with his palm before the toast could reach air. Don't you dare. Eli set the glass carefully on the table, unruffled. Okay, he said softly. We can skip the ceremony. Above them, footfalls crossed the bedroom and returned unhurried. The man descended, a shirt thrown over his shoulder now. He stopped on the last stair, took in the scene, and addressed Nora as if Daniel weren't between them. Everything all right. Everything is proceeding, Nora said. The man Finn, Nora supplied because names mattered, nodded. He turned to Daniel. You look pale. Sit down. Sit. Daniel's laugh was a thin wire. Get out of my house. Finn's expression changed not at all. Say please, he said, and went past him into the kitchen to help Marco plate. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, hands hanging useless at his sides, as if they had forgotten their original purpose. He looked at Nora again, and in that look was not the practiced charm he deployed at work, nor the mild contrition from the previous night, but a stripped-back fear. I can't do this, he said, and the honesty of it startled even him. I can't stand here while I live inside the idea you pitched me, she said. Marco slid a plate in front of Daniel on the island steak glossed, and resting a tangle of charred broccolini, a small ramekin of coarse salt. Try a bite, he said, because he did not seem to understand that food had become impossible. Out, Daniel said to all three, out. Now. Nora's face didn't change, but the air around her did. She picked up the towel from the counter and set it down again, precisely aligned with the edge. Gentlemen, she said, thank you. We're finished. Eli rose without protest, set his glass in the sink like a decent guest, and touched 2 fingers to his temple in a half salute to no one in particular. Jasper shrugged into his jacket, offered Daniel an unreadable look somewhere between amusement and warning, and followed Eli toward the door. Finn paused as he passed Daniel close enough that Daniel could see a small nick on his chin from an imprecise morning shave. She's remarkable, Finn said, not as a challenge, not as a claim, simply as an observation tossed lightly into the room. Then he went. The house absorbed the new quiet, which sounded larger than the old quiet, because it was full of the outline where noise had been. Daniel gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles paled. Nora leaned against the counter again and folded her arms. They're actors, she said. He looked up so fast his neck clicked. What? Actors, she repeated. I told them how to knock what to call you what to cook. I wanted you to see it from the other side of the glass. Color moved through his face in a series of weather fronts. Relief came first, a visible slackening, and then outrage scattering the relief like leaves. "You staged this," he said. "You manipulated me." "I held up a mirror," Nora said. "I was honest," he shot back. "I came to you before anything happened. You wrote a hotel plan," she said. "You drafted an agreement with yourself and asked me to notarize it after the fact." He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. "It felt different until I saw it," he said finally, voice strange in his own ears. Upstairs. The bed. "I know," she said, and for a second the room contained two kinds of grief at once, neither canceling the other. The steak cooled on the plate. The clock worked. The lake tapped the dock with its delicate insistence. Daniel moved to the sofa and sat as if joints had been replaced with glass. He pressed his fingers to his eyes and left small half-moons there when he lowered his hands. "I don't want this," he said. "I don't want any of this." Nora's mouth tightened. She looked past him to the window and its sheet of night. "I didn't either," she said. And yet, here we were. He nodded, head bowed the movement more like a flinch than an agreement. "I'm sorry," he said quietly enough that the word seemed to choose its own path to her, for what she asked, for the messages, for the idea, for making you feel like a placeholder in your own life. He said the last phrase arriving without his permission and staying. She let the words stand between them without rescuing them or knocking them over. Then she reached for the towel again, something to give her hand to do while her mind made a choice. It had been circling all day. "You can sleep on the couch," she said. "I need the bedroom." He nodded again, once, twice, as if the agreement could be hammered into place by repetition. He looked toward the hall. "I'll get a blanket." "In the closet by the front door," she said. "The blue one." He rose and moved past her, careful not to brush her arm as if proximity itself were flammable. He brought the blanket back and spread it on the couch with a competence that made something small in her chest pinch. He had always been good at making a space functional. He stood awkwardly a moment, then sat shoes still on as if he feared that removing them would indicate a trespass. Nora gathered the plates, slid the steak into a sealed container, ran a sponge over the already clean counter. When there was nothing left to straighten, she turned off the pendants, leaving the room in the softer light from a single lamp by the sofa. Daniel had leaned his head back and closed his eyes, not asleep, his mouth a flat line. At the threshold she paused. He sensed her there and opened his eyes. "Nora." She waited. "I ended it," he said, and the words arrived like a late delivery. "With Kara. I told her this afternoon." She absorbed the information without comment, then nodded once in a way that neither granted credit nor denied the fact. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he answered. She climbed the stairs past the photographs, past the room where Finn had once laid a shirt for effect into the room that was only a room again. She closed the door and stood with her palm flat against the wood, as if listening for a pulse on the other side. The house settled incrementally, timber answering timber. Downstairs, a cushion released air. Somewhere beyond the glass, the lake resumed its quiet grammar. Nora crossed to the bed and sat on the edge without undressing, hands folded in her lap. She breathed in and out until the breath felt like hers again. The brass clock might as well have been in this room for how distinctly she heard it, even untroubled operational. She reached for the lamp, hesitated, and left it on. Then she lay down on top of the covers, still in her sweater, and stared at the ceiling until it gave back her own gaze, blank and serviceable, willing to hold whatever would be asked of it. The morning arrived in pieces, water in the pipes kettle, knocking to a boil, the lake wearing a skin of pewter. Nora woke on top of the cover, sweater twisted at the waist, the lamp still on. Downstairs, a floorboard murmured. The couch gave a soft, exhausted sigh. She showered, dressed for the clinic, and moved through the kitchen with the practical quiet of someone whose hands knew more than her head. Daniel was already up, eyes bruised by lack of sleep, a mug set at her place, as if manners could make a bridge where a bridge had burned. "I made coffee," he said. "Thank you," she answered. The steam rose between them and didn't carry anything across. At the community health center, she operated on reflex. She reset a printer jam with one practiced pry, persuaded a courier to return with the missing box of test strips, offered a winter hat from the donation bin to a teenager who pretended not to need it. Twice, she had to apologize for not hearing a question. She did not write the word distracted in the incident log. She preferred concrete nouns. When noon touched the waiting room glass, she shut the door to her office and let herself cry exactly as long as the microwave took to thaw her soup. Then she wiped her face, ate standing up, and scheduled 3 follow-up calls. On her desk, the photo of Lila at graduation leaned half a degree to the left. Nora straightened it and felt the balance return by the width of a hinge. That evening home was a museum of ordinary objects, the houseplants with their innocent thirst, the 2 olive green mugs drying upside down on the rack, the couch folded into a bed by a blue blanket. Daniel stood by the sink when she came in. He had taken off his tie and rolled his sleeves like a man trying to look less formal to be forgiven. "I told her," he said without preamble. Nora hung her coat, Kara. He nodded. "I said I'd been wrong, that there would be no lunch, no hotel, no anything." Nora did not move toward the island and did not move away from it. "All right," she said. A small sound rode the silence. The old brass clock in the hall, the one Aunt Jo had left her collecting seconds like a bookkeeper. Daniel rubbed his forehead, ruining whatever part in his hair had survived the day. "I'll move into the guest room," he said. "The couch was for last night." "That's fine," she said. "The extra sheets are in the hall closet, the white set." He had been married to her long enough to parse the weight of those small instructions. He nodded once, twice, as if to fix the detail in place. The week arranged itself like a series of neutral tasks. Nora worked. Daniel left early and returned late, carrying the tiredness of a man who kept trying to skip a step on a staircase and had given up. Their speech grew narrower in its concerns: garbage day, the electrician, the envelope from the insurance company, language that did not need adjectives. On Wednesday, Nora came home after sunset to find the guest room neat, in a way that did not belong to Daniel. The bed was squared off, corners tight. The closet had been reorganized. He had cleared a drawer for himself in the bathroom and left his razor on a washcloth as if it needed a coaster. For a brief, disorienting moment, she was touched. Then the feeling slipped away, replaced by the quieter knowledge that competence and constancy were different skills. On Friday, a text arrived from a number she knew by heart. "Lila, hey Mom, you good? Been a minute." Nora stared at the screen until the letter steadied. "All right," she typed. "Busy at the clinic? You." A bubble appeared and vanished. Then midterms, coffee, repeat, a beat, and then, "Is Dad okay?" He sent a weird thumbs up to a group chat and then didn't answer. Nora's hand hovered above the keyboard. "We're working through something," she wrote. "We're fine." She deleted the last word and sent the rest. Another bubble. "Do I need to come home?" "No, Nora sent. Focus on school. I love you. Love you too." A sticker of a cartoon owl with a graduation cap. Nora put the phone face down on the table and watched the ceiling for a while, like one might watch a lake for the first ripple of weather. Saturday morning in the farmer's market, Melissa from the clinic spotted her in front of the winter apples. "You've been quiet," she said, which was another way to say your face is telling on you. Nora smiled, a shape that fit and did not pinch. Later, under the heat lamps of the bakery stand, Melissa touched her forearm. "If you ever need a name," she said. "For someone good. To talk to." Nora shoved her hands deeper into her coat pockets, felt the slip with Daniel's new department's phone number crumple there. "A name might help," she said. On Monday, she called the name. A receptionist with a gentleness that felt trained but not counterfeit put her on a waiting list and then called back the same afternoon with an opening. "Dr. Elin Hartley," she said. "Wednesday, 4 o'clock. Intake is 50 minutes. When Nora relayed the appointment, Daniel's relief was so naked it made her look away. "I'll be there," he said. "Thank you." They sat opposite each other in Dr. Hartley's office 2 days later, feet planted on a well-behaved rug. The room had the neutrality of professional compassion. A black and white photograph of a shoreline, a dying succulent, resurrected by expensive neglect certificates in frames that promised competence without shouting it. Dr. Hartley was in her 50s, hair-cropped, close eyes that saw without intruding. "We'll keep it practical," she said after introductions. "No interrupting. Speak to your own experience. If I ask you to pause, it's to help, not to punish." Daniel nodded too often. Nora nodded once. "What brings you here?" Dr. Hartley asked, looking at Nora. "A phone," Nora said. The word surprised her. Also a woman at his office. Also the shape of a life that decided not to fit us without telling us it had changed. Daniel's hands were tensed on his knees, knuckles pale. I thought if I said it before anything happened, it would be... He caught himself. Less bad. Not less, Nora said. Dr. Hartley gestured small as though moving a chess piece that did not exist. Daniel, what were you feeling in the months before the messages? Old, he said, and then gathering the word, replaceable. Sales went soft. My team started looking at me like I was a department, not a person. Kara laughed at my jokes, and I mistook that for all sorts of things. Energy, I guess. He swallowed. Nora didn't laugh at my jokes because she'd heard them, and I took that as proof that I didn't exist. Nora looked at him, then sharp and tired at once. I existed, she said. I know. He pressed his thumb into the meat of his palm, as if he could stamp a thought into place. I started to draft a solution and didn't ask if it solved the right problem. Dr. Hartley turned to Nora, and you, steady, Nora said. Sometimes to the point of erasure. The clinic runs because I hold the tape. The house runs because I remember the numbers. I thought that was love nothing dropped. But I stopped asking if I could put anything down. They talked until the air in the room felt stirred and breathable. Dr. Hartley gave them a small homework, the sort that sounded childish until you did it 3 times a day. Say one true thing without fixing it. No evaluating, no defending. They left the building and stood on the sidewalk with the same awkwardness as after their first dates decades ago, back when small talk had the crackle of danger because it might not find purchase. Coffee, Daniel asked. Tea, Nora said, and they found a place where the windows fogged and people read on screens while pretending they were reading on paper. They said one true thing each and let it sit like a stone on the table. Nora. The bed feels haunted. Daniel. The couch smells like old conversations. Nora. When the clock ticks at night, I count. Daniel hesitated, then offered his third I don't trust my phone. The barista called a name that almost sounded like Nora's. A young man collected a drink that was not hers. On the walk back to the car, a wind off the lake found skin at the cuffs of their coats. Nora pulled her sleeves down and felt 17 for a second, not because she felt young, but because the cold had that precise of an edge. 2 sessions later, Dr. Hartley asked a question that required more air than the room contained. When did you last feel close? She said. Not efficient, not cordial. Close. Nora began to say it depends what close means, and then stopped. Daniel stared at the rug's border pattern like a student cheating off a geometric proof. Years, Nora said finally. Before that, Daniel seemed surprising them both. The storm. The spring the roof went and we camped under the leak. We ate cereal and watched the ceiling with the pots lined like soldiers. His voice changed when he found the picture. Everything smelled like wet paper. We laughed because it was that or cry. And you, Dr. Hartley, asked Nora. Nora closed her eyes until the image sharpened. The night Lila read us her terrible poem and couldn't finish because she was laughing too hard, she said. All the metaphors were kitchen appliances. We sat on the floor and let her be ridiculous. Dr. Hartley made a small note. This week, she said, I want an evening that does not fix anything. Not a meeting. An experience. Phones off. No logistics. The goal is not progress. The goal is to be in the same moment on purpose. In the car, Daniel was cautious with his voice. I saw a flyer, he said, hands at 10 and 2, at the hardware store. The Arboretum has a lantern walk after dark this month. The one with the light sculptures, Nora said. Right. She didn't answer in the space where an answer would have fallen easily years ago. The lake flashed between the houses as they drove past winter's sun, laying a dull coin on the water. Okay, she said, at the 3rd traffic light. Saturday. They argued mildly on Saturday about whether to eat before or after, and decided almost comically to split a sandwich in the car, so neither option would declare itself a romance. Nora changed into a forest green dress that skimmed the outline of who she was now, not who she had been. Daniel shaved with care and nicked his chin and said nothing about it. The Arboretum gates framed a crowd moving at the speed of interest, not the speed of urgency. Paper lanterns hung from branches like fruit that had chosen light over pulp. Paths braided through the grounds in loops. Sculptures breathed color against bark and stone. A quartet set up near the conifers bowed a test phrase and then rescinded their music like a promise kept too easily. "This is all right," Nora said, which was how she meant beautiful when she did not want to startle the moment. Daniel nodded, which was how he meant, "I'm relieved to be here with you," when he did not want to press the moment into confession. They walked side by side, hands at their side shoulders almost, but not quite aligning, the old choreography attempting to remember itself. At a small pond, filament lanterns floated in lines, their reflections making a narrow cathedral of light. Children pointed. A woman in a red scarf cried quietly and smiled while she did it. The air smelled like damp leaves and cinnamon, the faint sizzle of a vendor's cart far off. "Do you remember the butterfly house?" Daniel asked. "When you swore a blue morpho was going to bite you." "I did not swear," Nora said. "I suggested respectfully that a creature should keep to its own leaf." "You squealed." I made a sound consistent with surprise. He laughed the same laugh he had taken to college parties and into sales, but tempered now, not weaponized for charm. The sound gave Nora the odd sensation of walking back into a room she had lived in and finding the furniture rearranged to better suit the light. They found a bench near a stand of birches wrapped in spirals of white LEDs. The lights leaned into the trunk's own silver. It was the first honest collaboration Nora had seen between artifice and bark. Her hands were cold. She kept them folded in her lap and watched the breath come out of her in brief signatures. Daniel cleared his throat in a way that made Nora brace and then unbrace. "I read something," he said, "about how midlife is a set of second glances. People look at the first map they drew and realize the landmarks moved." She looked at him, not hostile. "And your first map?" "Had the wrong scale," he said. "Everything I thought would prove I was alive was just louder." They let the sentence stand without laying a moral on top of it. A child ran past in boots, the squeak of rubber on frost, audible as a small truth about physics. From the other side of the pond came a shout of recognition, and then the shush of someone who wanted to hear the quiet show itself. Nora said, "The clinic has my spine. The house has my hands. I keep wondering where my voice went." Daniel did not rush to fix it. "I miss being the person you told things to before they were finished," he said after a while. "Not because I want to own them. Because I like the shape your mind makes when it's building something." She turned that over as if testing a coin's weight. It felt both familiar and new, a recognition in a different accent. They walked another loop, and another, not covering ground so much as letting light and shadow offer their versions of the story. At a gazebo strung with glass orbs the size of cupped palms, a docent spoke in a low voice about the artist's choice of filaments. Nora pretended to listen and did a little. When they reached the Japanese garden, the lanterns had thinned and the crowd had too. A small bridge arched over black water. Beyond it, a stone lantern glowed with its own internal modesty. Daniel stopped. He looked like a person deciding whether to step onto ice that might hold Nora. He said, "I'm all the way sorry. Not sorry that I got caught. Not sorry because I miss what we were. Sorry because I made you carry the idea of being replaced in a room where you had already set the table and cooked the meal." The words did not perform anything. They sat in the air like breath you could see. Nora, who had expected a pitch at every turn, noticed that this was not one. "Okay," she said, because acknowledgement was the only correct size. They crossed the bridge. On the other side, a path sloped gently, needle-soft underfoot. She reached out half a gesture, and he did not move until her hand found his sleeve. Then he offered his palm, opened an invitation without grip. She placed her hand in it, as if testing a temperature. The contact sent no cinematic voltage. It announced itself more quietly, the way a house announces company when a second pair of shoes joins the first on the mat. They walked like that until the cold put its hands on their faces. Near the gate, a vendor sold paper cups of hot tea from a samovar. They stood still to drink and let the heat undo what the wind had done. On the drive home, the radio stayed off. They did not make vows. The tires hummed their low practical music. When Daniel pulled into the driveway, the lake had gone black again, a chalkboard waiting for someone to write on it in fog. He put the car in park and took his hands off the wheel. Nora rested hers on her knees. The porch light caught the small nick on his chin. She registered it and did not comment. They went inside. In the kitchen, the pendants carved out their familiar circles of light. The house smelled like itself, a mixture of lemon oil and the ghost of last night's dinner. Daniel hung his coat in the hall and did not follow her farther in. Nora set her keys on the counter and stood with her back to the sink, watching nothing in particular, until the nothing turned back into a room. He stayed where he was, shoes on, careful with the air. She looked at him and nodded toward the kettle. He filled it and set it to boil. When the click came, he poured and they held their cups the way people hold warmth in winter, not as metaphor but as task. The brass clock in the hall did not speed up or slow down. It marked the seconds it was given. Nora breathed. Daniel breathed. The house made its quiet agreements around them. Cold came early and stayed. Along the lake, the reeds bent in the same direction for days at a time, and the slate water kept its color even at noon. Inside the house learned a softer volume. Nora and Daniel moved through rooms without edging around each other, not performing courtesy, simply sharing air that no longer felt contested. They kept going to Dr. Hartley. The office plants failed and then recovered. New mugs appeared identical to the old ones. The questions stayed the same shape and found new answers between them. Name the thing you didn't say this week, Dr. Hartley would ask. Nora. I didn't say I hated filling the humidifier. Daniel. I didn't say I was afraid of hearing your keys in the lock at the wrong hour. Name one moment of ease. Nora. He handed me a wrench under the sink without me asking. Daniel. She laughed at a video of a beagle trying stairs. They practiced small repairs. Daniel left his phone on the counter, face-up notifications tamed to the functional. Nora, who did not ask to look, found her eyes skimming the inert glass anyway, and realized the impulse had dulled until it no longer demanded a response. He sent an email to his manager confirming the department transfer and printed a copy for the file drawer labeled Home Admin. She entered it under H for Hartley by mistake and left it there on purpose. They made meals without negotiating what the making meant. On Wednesdays, Nora chopped vegetables with a rhythm she hadn't trusted in months. On Sundays, Daniel learned the difference between simmer and hold. Twice he oversalted and said so before she could. Twice she forgot the pan warming and set it back empty to let it cool, a truce with herself she would not have considered earlier. Lila called on a Thursday between classes, breathless from stares. You sound better, she said, suspicious and hopeful at once. We're trying, Nora answered. Trying like trying. Or trying like trying on shoes. Trying like trying. Nora said, and Lila accepted the cadence if not the content. That weekend she sent a photo of a campus tree wrapped in lights, and a caption with a single word brighter. At the clinic, December crowded the schedule the way it always did. Flu shots, end-of-year paperwork, a goodbye sheet cake for the nurse retiring after 19 years. Melissa tapped the calendar with her pen. You're steadier, she said, not as praise, just observation. Nora replaced the empty hand sanitizer bottle on the intake desk and let the remark land where it wanted. Dr. Hartley's last weekly session fell on a day that smelled like snow. In the waiting room, a child in a red coat rotated in a circle until the zipper pull flashed. A man in a knit hat stared at a water stain on the ceiling like it might decode something. Nora and Daniel sat side by side with a folder between them that contained nothing important and felt like ballast. Inside, Dr. Hartley folded her hands and looked not at their faces, but at the space just above them, as if checking the room's temperature. Where are you now, she said, compared to the day you arrived? Daniel answered first without rushing. I don't rehearse speeches anymore, he said. I talk and stop when I'm done. Nora said I sleep, not every night. Enough that I remember what rested feels like. Dr. Hartley gave a dry smile that suggested approval without claiming credit. What will you do when the quiet feels false, she asked. Nora, say so. Daniel. Ask for the question under the question. Dr. Hartley nodded and wrote 2 words on a notepad, tore the sheet, and slid it toward them. Check in, it read, which was almost insulting in its simplicity, until you tried to do it when you least wanted to. In the hallway afterward, they put on their coats. The zipper snagged on Daniel's jacket. Nora reached and freed it with the same efficiency she used on stuck drawers at the clinic. He said thanks in a tone without ceremony. At home, the guest room was as Daniel had left it that morning, bed made spare temporary in a way that stared back. Nora stood in the doorway. About the room, she said. He looked up from untying his shoes, waited. "I'd like to sleep," she said, without choosing between space and company. She turned toward the stairs. "Let's try tonight," and moved slowly from there. He didn't say anything resembling a vow. He just gathered his book and toothbrush and followed her upstairs, not triumphant, not afraid, careful with the step that creaked. They did not make an event of it. He left a corner of the duvet turned down. She turned off the lamp on the far side. They lay like people reacquainting themselves with a shore they used to know how to walk feet, finding sand they had once trusted. She woke once at 2, the clock stitching its patient seconds from the hall, and slept again until the gray of 7 draped itself over the room. Morning made coffee ordinary, and the ordinary was welcome. Daniel put a winter hat by the back door because the wind had found his ears the day before. Nora moved it to the basket because hats belonged in the basket. They did not narrate these gestures or soak them in meaning. The living room held the blue blanket folded on the arm of the sofa, a reminder without an argument. A week later, Lila E. arrived for a short break and stood in the entryway smelling like train metal and cold air. She looked at them both like a scientist checking results against a hypothesis, then dropped her bag and hugged her mother, her father separately and properly. Over dinner, she asked about the Arboretum and rolled her eyes at the Beagle video and asked for the spare key back in case you two become unreliable in your old age. Nora handed it over, and it felt less like a surrender than a redistribution of faith. Snow came. Not theatrical, not paltry. The kind the town plowed without drama, and the lake wore like a sheet torn along a clean line. They trimmed the tree exactly as they always had, with the same argument about whether tinsel was festive or tacky, and the same conclusion, one strand not two, and only on the back. On the last Saturday before the holiday, Nora stood at the sink warming her hands around a mug, while Daniel took cinnamon rolls from the oven, the kitchen briefly smelling like a bakery that had chosen restraint. He set a small box on the island near her mug. "For you," he said. Now, not under the tree. She opened it. Inside lay a thin bracelet silver with a charm that looked at first like a knot, and then like two circles lodged inside each other, not quite symmetrical, the overlap honest about its own geometry. "The jeweler called it a sailor's loop," Daniel said. "Two lines that hold because they share the pull." Nora lifted it out. The metal was cool enough to notice. She turned her wrist and fastened the clasp with the dexterity of someone who had zipped dresses on friends in dim rooms before parties. The charm rested against her skin and did not ask to be interpreted. "Thank you," she said. The words stayed small and correct, which was the size they needed. They ate in companionable, quiet plates, warm coffee, hot enough to require patience. Later, Lila joined them, hair damp from a shower, wearing a sweater Daniel used to own. She saw the bracelet raised her eyebrows at Nora, and Nora nodded once. Lila did not clap or exclaim. She sat and reached for a roll and said, "Okay." When the afternoon light went the color of paper, and the neighborhood blew snow from driveways in parallel lines, Nora took the box the bracelet had come in and put it in the drawer with birthday candles and spare keys. She stood with the drawer open a moment longer than necessary, not for meaning for location. Evening brought a small dinner, then dishes. Daniel rinsed, Nora stacked. Their hands met once when both reached for the same lid. The touch was nothing spectacular, only proof of proximity. On the counter, the brass clock marked its even measure. Nora found she did not need to count. Later, Lila and Daniel watched a movie Nora had no interest in. She sat in the adjoining room with a book and read 2 pages, and then another, and realized she had not been able to follow a page in months without a second page to pull it along. The heat clicked off, and back on competent as a metronome. She listened not for signs for the sound of a house being a house. When the credits rolled, Daniel collected mugs and paused in the doorway. "Tea," he said. "Please," she answered. He set the kettle to boil. Steam rose with its narrow prayer. The lake was a dark plain behind the glass mistakes of snow caught against the fence. Nora touched the small charm at her wrist, and then let her hand fall. The kettle clicked. Gas burned blue, and then settled. Daniel poured. They stood side by side and drank. When the cups were empty, they rinsed them and left them to dry, not because it stood for anything, but because dishes needed doing, and there was nothing in the room that argued otherwise. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.